Friends. Hi, I'm Jeff Isaac. I teach political science at Indiana University in Bloomington. I write a lot about politics. I care about politics. And I want to talk to you for a few minutes about the ongoing contention surrounding the election of the president in the United States. If I seem a little distracted, it's because I tried to lock my dog, a Great Pyrenees named Frankie, out of my office, but she pushed her way back in. And at any moment, she could start barking hysterically at a truck. Nonetheless, I will persist. I want to talk about a piece that I published yesterday called "We Must Not Delude Ourselves" about Trump's power grabbing. And I want to talk about the reasons why and what this means for thinking about the future of democracy in the US. For 4 years, Americans have been debating the extent to which the institutions of constitutional democracy are resilient in the face of Donald Trump's relentless assault. Trump has said many terrible things and he's done many terrible things. He's also said some terrible things that he would do that he hasn't done. But his narcissism and his commitment to personal aggrandizement and his misanthropy and racism, these things have never been in doubt. At the same time, for years, pundits kept waiting for a pivot that never came. Never. Even in recent months, smart commentators have wondered when he was going to realize that it would be best for him to have a serious public health response to COVID. Never happened. And very smart commentators have been incredulously wondering in recent weeks how Trump could possibly be campaigning in such an angry and racist way if he hoped to win the election. He would lose suburban women. He would suffer a resounding defeat. But the truth is simple. Trump is not a normal politician, and so he does not campaign like a normal politician. He doesn't reach for the middle because he hates the middle. And he throws red meat to his red base because they love him and he loves their adulation and its power. And it is not civility or legality or constitutional democracy that matters to him. And alas, that matters to his supporters. Now, as the election results are coming in, and as it appears that Joe Biden is likely to win, commentators are observing that Trump has no serious legal route to contesting the election. Smart people are asking, what can he possibly be doing with all these lawsuits? Doesn't he realize his path to victory is almost closed? To say these things, to ask these questions, is to live in a dream world. Trump's path to power was always only contingently related to democracy, and only in the most scurrilous, lying, cheating ways. Remember the Mueller report? Remember impeachment? Trump did not play fair in 2016, and he welcomed Russian meddling, and he was willing to violate every norm of constitutional democracy to win, and he won. And ever since, he's been willing to violate every norm of constitutional democracy and many laws of constitutional democracy to stay in power. The things he's doing right now to obstruct a Biden victory, to initiate lawsuits in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Georgia, now Nevada, these things that he's doing to obstruct a Biden victory and to cheat his way to keeping power are precisely the things he said he would do, and that reporters like Barton Gellman in The Atlantic reported about. The nasty tactics to invalidate ballots and stop the counting, the conspiring with state Republicans and Rudy Giuliani, the plans to obstruct in other ways. People spoke off the record to Gellman and others about this. Some people even spoke on the record about this. We knew this would happen, and it is happening. This contest ultimately is not about the counting of votes. It is not about exclusively the legal paths to power. It is about a president who is an autocrat and who hates the opposition and believes in his supreme authority and is surrounded by yes men and women, including some prominent legal authorities who tell him he has supreme authority. A president who has said he would not respect an election that he lost and who is doing exactly what he said. It is about an effort to hijack the election and shut down the admittedly threadbare democratic processes we have left. Count every vote. Protect the results. Such expectations were once, for most of us, taken for granted, foolishly so. They were always more precarious than we imagined them to be. But now such expectations are rebellious demands, forms of dissent against autocratic power, and forms of social self-defense by citizens of their very flawed and fragile constitutional democracy. Trump might eventually be forced to respect the electoral results and to accept a Biden victory. It appears that things are tending in that direction, at least in terms of the way the votes are falling. What Trump expects is something else. He might be forced to respect the electoral results. But if so, this is because he will be forced to do so by serious legal and institutional and mobilizational pressure, by citizen action, by resistance to his authoritarianism, by the resilience of democratic citizenship, more than the resilience of certain legal institutions on their own. The vote count matters, but not as a legal fait accompli, and only as a rallying cry and as an outcome that must be defended in courts, in legislatures, in the court of public opinion, in the street. If we assume that this election will proceed as normal, that legal routes to winning are what matters most, and that there will be a peaceful democratic transfer of power, then there will be no peaceful and democratic transfer of power. There will only be a new form of electoral dictatorship. We must defend democracy so that we can rehabilitate it and expand it and improve it and realize its most noble aspirations. But if we take it for granted now, we will lose it for now and for a long time to come. Now, why do I insist on this? Even though it is quite likely, apparently, the pundits say, that when the votes are all in from Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, suburbs of Philadelphia and or Georgia and or Arizona, Biden will win. Because it is a fact that winning the presidency, becoming president-elect, is a very complicated process, much more complicated than the counting of the votes right after the election. This is the central point of Barton Gellman's really important piece that I'm drawing on in The Atlantic called The Election That Could Break America. Gellman points out, drawing largely on legal scholarship of election law experts like Edward Foley and a number of others, that in fact, between election day and the constitutionally prescribed inauguration of the president on January 20th, 2021, there is what he calls an interregnum. And in that interregnum, in that intermediary period, there are a number of vulnerabilities where what seems to be the proper outcome of the election could be contested. He points out that this is a complicated outcome of the Constitution and federal law and state law. He points out that it's very important to understand that until December 8th, according to the Electoral Control Act, the electoral teams selected by the states of each state are not selected. It's important to point out that the Electoral College theoretically doesn't meet and vote until December 14th. That other deadline was December 8th. I'm not sure if I said that. That period is the period where in the states, electoral votes are basically cast. And the Constitution basically says that each state shall decide how to send its electoral votes, how to determine. The winner-take-all system we're familiar with, this is a function of state law, and it's a function of convention over time. And the Constitution does not prescribe that. And Gelman raises real questions, not only about whether state legislatures controlled by Republicans in swing states might try to subvert a proper vote in their states, but that they may in fact already be planning this in league with Giuliani and others. In these swing states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, there are Democratic governors and secretaries of state, but there are also Republican state legislatures that have constitutional power if they choose to exercise it. Of course, it's contentious, it's questionable. It's probably, well, it's definitely underhanded. It's smarmy. It's not really true to the norms of democracy. It might ultimately fail, but the powers exist. Gelman points it out. He points out that it's not until the electoral votes that are cast by the Electoral College on December 14th are certified by Congress on January 6th that they become officially validated. And that itself could involve complicated procedures. Gelman points out the various ways that a malign, malevolent, miserable, misanthropic individual in league with political cronies, in other words, Donald Trump and the Republican Party, how they could manipulate, use and abuse the law to obstruct and question and call into question, all the while Trump sits in the White House as the default president. Gelman points this out. He points out that these maneuvers, the beginnings of which are going on now, hopefully they'll be stopped, but we don't know that they'll be stopped. He points out that these maneuvers will take place in a legal way, accompanied by incitements to the mob. We see this happening, by the way. It's not a big deal yet in Philadelphia or in Maricopa County in Arizona, although apparently there are crowds that are demanding that vote counting be stopped, just like there were crowds that assailed and harassed Biden buses and Biden campaign activities in different places, just like the governor, the state of Wisconsin, the governor of the state of Michigan was almost kidnapped, tried by a people's court, and executed according to the popular justice. These things happened. They happened because of a kind of incitement. Trump is still doing this with the tweets. This is all part of the political contestation that Gelman, among many others, says is possible. To say that it's possible is to say that we need to take it very seriously. To say that it's possible is to say that the counting of the votes is necessary, but insufficient, at least potentially insufficient. If we're lucky, maybe it's sufficient. Maybe he'll go away. Some of my very smart friends have pointed out that from their observation, the Trump efforts to stymie vote counting in the states, the legal efforts are pathetic, they're disorganized, they're flimsy. That may be true. It may continue to be true, or it may not be true. How many times have we pointed out how pathetic and flimsy Trump's legal arguments are? Like, for example, with impeachment or the Mueller report or whatever. Emoluments. We could go on, don't need to. The point is, these are possibilities, and they are built in to the process. We need to take them seriously because they're real. But even if they don't come to pass, even if we're lucky, and if Biden scrapes through, and if the political process validates it, and even if Trump never concedes, and he's a miserable bastard who continues to make things difficult, and he will make things difficult for a long time to come, along with his family and his despicable children and their money and their media aspirations, etc., and their 68 million followers. Okay, even if Trump is not able to obstruct that process, and we're lucky enough to get a Biden presidency, we will also have probably a Republican Senate. We will have a weakened House Democratic caucus. We will have a poisoned public culture in which 68 million people voted for a fascist telling them he was going to take away their health insurance and refusing to deal with a pandemic that over 250,000 people were dying of. People had 4 years to experience this. 68 million of them voted. Could you imagine how much these people must hate you? If you are Black or brown, if you are a liberal or a radical, if you're a journalist, or if you're an immigrant, or if you're an intellectual, or if you're a woman who takes reproductive freedom seriously, or if you believe in science. Could you imagine how much that 68 million Americans really revile what you represent to them? Anyway, we'll have that if we're lucky, but we might not be lucky. And that's why we need to be prepared to continue to defend the democratic election until it is a done deal, and it is not a done deal until Inauguration Day. However, let's assume we're lucky. There's another reason why we need to stop talking like it's just about counting the votes. And it is because it is never, and it is not about just counting the votes. One of the things that this entire situation makes very clear to so many Americans is how arcane and archaic and insane by current standards the American system of elections in general is, and the American system of electing the presidency in particular is. It has all these veto points built into it. We imagine democracy as we imagine a town hall democracy. That's like the ideal that comes to mind for many. We raise our hands, the hands are counted, okay. That is so far from the process that we have. First of all, in order to get to raise your hand, you have to go through hoops. Then if you're a certain kind of person, you get to raise your hand. But then the question is, where and how you raise your hand. Do you have to go like a million miles away to get to raise your hand? And how, actually, is the hand raising registered by anyone else? And how does that get communicated to election officials who then count those hands? And then in the end, what does it all even mean if there's an electoral college? It is so complicated. It's more complicated. I've been teaching political science for almost 40 years. I have a PhD from Yale University. I was a student of probably the greatest US political scientist of the past 70 years or century, maybe, Robert Dahl. And I taught his textbook in American politics courses that I taught at Fordham. Until recently, I didn't understand the complexities of US electoral law because we take so much for granted about it. And in general, that's been okay. And it's not okay now. And this means it's not okay anymore. So we need to stop talking about the vote count and saying stuff like, well, if he gets Pennsylvania, he won, he's president-elect. Biden wins Georgia, he's president. No, he's not president. He's not president until he's president. That's point number one. Point number two, we need to make it so that this is not the way people get to be president. We need to make it so that there is serious, substantial democratic reform of our institutions, okay? And we're talking about now voter participation reform and electoral reform. There's not, by the way, it does not say in the Constitution that you have the right to vote if you're an American citizen. It says that you can't have that right taken away based on your race or previous servitude in the 15th Amendment. It says something else similar about women in the 19th Amendment, but it never says all adult citizens have the right to vote, because that has never been the constitutional understanding. And there's so much variation as to how that plays out in practice in this country, in 50 states and associated territories. It's crazy. It's unjust. It's a recipe for disaster. If we're lucky, we will avert the disaster now. But that's the real issue. And that's why the kinds of issues that Gelman and others have brought to the fore need to stay at the fore. Because we're not yet out of the woods now, but more generally, we really need to take seriously major political change if we are truly to be a constitutional liberal democracy where citizens can participate in a transparent way and where majorities have power, even though it's not untrammeled power, and where it's possible to use civic power to generate effective government to solve public problems. This way that we have is counter-majoritarian, it's obscure, it's corrupt. In fundamental ways, it's not democratic. And we need to change that. And all of this is made clear by the current moment. And the current constitutional contention, perhaps, if we're not lucky, crisis, centered around this succession and whether there'll be a peaceful transfer of power in which the loser goes quietly into the night. This is an occasion for us to think much more deeply about what democracy is and what American democracy is. And I hope in the days and weeks and months and years to come, this kind of thinking will be promoted at every level of education, by serious journalists, by other forms of media, by the political parties, by the political class, by grassroots organizations, and there needs to be change. And now is the time. And with that, I simply say, I really, 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 really need for Donald Trump to go away. And I hope that next year, we will still have a constitutional democracy that we can make better. And perhaps it will even be safe to go outside. That would be wonderful. And with that, I say goodbye.